Welcome back to the Rich Eisen Show. As my coach at the University of Michigan told me on yesterday's program, Jim Harbaugh's rooting for Ohio State on Monday night. Does that surprise you, Charles Davis of Fox Sports? Does that surprise you, Charles?
No. Hey, Rich. How you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too,
It
Charles.
really doesn't surprise me, even though you're not supposed to root for Ohio State. But Jim is the type of guy that loves beating the best.
Yeah.
And him going into Michigan, if they're now chasing Ohio State, which they already are, but to chase Ohio State with a national championship and beat them, that's right up Jim Harbaugh's alley.
Yeah. I'm walking and talking right now, Charles. I don't know if you can tell.
You can do it all.
You know, I'm walking and talking to move to a different part of the Rich Eisen Show set in our downtown El Segundo studios. I'm chatting with Charles Davis of Fox Sports here. Eric Stonestreet is going to join us in studio later on. Big Kansas State guy.
Cam's joining you?
He is. Eric Stonestreet will be here physically, Charles. And
He was at a game I did this year.
Yep.
He was at the Kansas State TCU game.
He's always at those.
And the bummer of everything, I love my job, you know that. But when you are in the booth, you don't get to see the celebs.
Right.
They're hanging out on the sidelines. They're with the team. Ty Burrell was with Oregon at UCLA earlier this year. I mean, I was going crazy.
Well,
I was like, is there any way I can get down there and just say hello?
Well, Stonestreet is the real deal.
Yes,
I mean, he is the real deal sports fan. He's not just wearing it on his sleeve. He's a big Chiefs guy, and he is a big Kansas State guy. And we've got him basically banging drums, and we've got all sorts of stuff for him to be a sports fan. And the reason why I bring it up here is Bill Snyder, the Kansas State head coach, when asked the challenge that Urban Meyer has with Marcus Mariota and Oregon, how Urban Meyer can defend him, he said, put 14 guys on the field. Is that how much of a high level that Mariota's playing at right now, Charles?
It is, Rich, and to me it started with the UCLA game this year because somewhere along the way someone told Marcus, and he internalized it and believed it, that everything he had to do this year needed to be from the pocket. Because if you go back to the two games where they really struggled, they beat Washington State on the road 38-31, but I think he took 7 sacks in that game, Rich.
Yeah.
And then Arizona, when they got beat at home, I think he took 5 sacks and was under a lot of pressure. But if you put on the tapes of those games, he didn't combat it with his legs. He stayed in the pocket, took too long with an offensive line that was struggling. Then they get Jake Fisher back at left tackle, helped solidify things, and he came back for the UCLA game. And Mariota, for the first time in a long time, chose to be what I would call a good selfish. In other words, go, take off, run. Because to him, I think he's thinking, I need to get the ball to people, distribute. No. Your legs combat pressure. And against UCLA, he did that right from the word go. And truthfully, Rich, from that point on, he and Oregon really haven't looked back because that game was 42-17 in the third quarter. All right, I mean, you know, so whatever the final score was, don't be fooled by the cosmetics. They pounded UCLA that day.
And Charles Davis of Fox Sports joining us here on the program. And usually when we see a team with such a great offensive player, potentially the first overall pick in the draft, we ignore the other side of the ball. And Oregon, it could be just as stout over there defensively, Charles. What is Ohio State's problems or issues facing them on offense coming up on Monday night?
Taking care of the football. Look, Rich, when you and I were kids and Jerry Philbin roamed the earth, all right, and terrorized people, we were in a different set of how we played defense. Hold teams to less than X number of yards per game, less than X number of yards per carry, blah, 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 blah. Nowadays, we don't want to give up explosive plays, 10 to 15-yard runs and passes. We want to create lost yardage plays because you put people behind the chains, as we like to say all the time. In other words, sacks, tackles for losses. But the biggest one of all is takeaways. Oregon is second in the country in turnover margin. How did they increase the second half lead and blow out Florida State? Took the ball away. Yes, I know Jameis threw it over his head, but where did it end up? In the end zone. There were other plays that Oregon had a real effect and took the ball away from the running back, Dalvin Cook. That's the key for Ohio State. It sounds trite. It's the stuff we say every game. People at home roll their eyes. Let Ohio State turn it over 4 times and see if there's any eye rolling on Monday night. It'll be much more like shoulders slumped because you turn over 4 times against Oregon, it's one going in the other direction by their defense because they're fast. But 2, Mariota's likely to put it in the end zone if he gets his hands on it for extra possessions.
Man, if the Arizona Cardinals only had a third-string quarterback as good as Ohio State's, right, Charles?
Rich, you study the program like everyone else. No, it's hard in that league to have a second quarterback, let alone a third. Ohio State, because they are top of the food chain, like a number of other programs, they recruit so deeply that third guy could very well do what we've seen from Cardale Jones. I'm not talking about the mid-level programs. They're not as deep in their talent. But in Ohio State, in Alabama, those types of programs, when they're at the top of their game, they could very well have a Cardale Jones on the bench. But for him to come in and play to this level, team has helped him greatly. Don't mistake that. But the poise he played with early against Wisconsin, which allowed his confidence to grow, and he didn't get his confidence shaken in the first quarter against Alabama when Alabama blitzed him early. There's a lot to like about that young man. He's come a long way from that tweet his freshman year that people keep wanting to stick him with about, I came here to play football, not to play school.
Yeah, well.
I mean, he was a kid.
Don't get me started on that, though, Charles.
He was a kid,
I'm trying to be above board here. You're pushing me to the limits here, talking about Ohio State, and my coach telling me I had to root for him.
I can't believe you let the coach talk about Ohio State and you didn't just cringe.
It's really pushing me to the limits here. I got to be very, very honest with you. But hey, if Jim Harbaugh says he's rooting for Ohio State, then I guess I have to.
Well,
also.
you and I both know his motives are ulterior.
I can't resist it, though, Charles. You help me out with this. How does some kid that didn't play until the Michigan game at the very end and then played his first career start in the Big Ten championship game, how does he have so many of those stickers on his helmet? Do they just give it out because he breathes? He practices photosynthesis? How do you get so many stickers in just 2 seconds?
Well, when your team wins 11 games along the way, everyone gets a lot of stickers.
It's like pieces of flair, right? from Office Space, right?
Too much flair.
Exactly.
Too much flair.
Exactly, and now he's added to him on his own. But his teammates around him, that team has really peaked at the proper time, and they've got a couple of places where they're underrated.
Yeah.
Ezekiel Elliott, you know all the runners in the Big Ten. I mean, before you get to Ezekiel Elliott's name, you would say Melvin Gordon, Wisconsin, Tevin Coleman, Indiana, Jeremy Langford, Michigan State. I mean, you just keep going. I mean, there's a bunch of Amir Abdullah, Nebraska. And then it's like, hey, oh, yeah, Ezekiel Elliott's 1,000-yard range, pretty darn good. Yeah, we've seen that now. How about the receivers? Devin Smith plays the ball in the air as well as any receiver in the country, and that includes Amari Cooper at Alabama. When that ball's in the air, he goes and makes plays on it, and that allows Cardale Jones to show off his big arm, but just throw it up there in one-on-one situations and say, go get it for me, big boy, and they do.
Charles Davis joining me here. So what happens when toe meets ball Monday night? Who do you think wins this game?
I took Oregon over Florida State. I took Ohio State over Alabama. I'm going one more upset. I've got Ohio State over Oregon. I think Ohio State's defensive front, Bosa, Miller, Frazier, and inside Washington and Bennett, will do enough to control the Oregon run game. I don't think you totally shut it down, but Oregon wants to run the ball first. That's who they are. They'll control it enough, make Mariota have to make every single play. And I think Ohio State has enough speed, as we've seen. They outran Alabama to run with Oregon. And I like what Ohio State brings to the table right now, that mix of toughness, peaking at the right time. I think it's a heck of a game, but I'm going Ohio State close.
Okay. All right. There you have it. Hey, Charles, you know how it works in the talent evaluation portion of the NFL calendar. You and I have done this many, many times. You're the official voice of the 40-yard dash, essentially.
Yes, sir.
My 40-yard dash. And, Charles, we already know what the red flag we're going to be talking about ad nauseum about Jameis Winston, who's then going to be rehabilitated by his pro day. And, we know how this is going to play out.
Yes,
Mariota, what do you think over the next few weeks is going to be his biggest knock? System quarterback? He's too shy with the media? What do you think we're going to be talking about Mariota or those are going to be whispering about him to perhaps knock him down to size or hope that he falls lower than just number one overall?
We've seen enough of the system quarterbacks come through that we utilize in the NFL, and we're marrying the system to them more and more all the time. Cam's in the playoffs right now. Dalton was in the playoffs. Flacco was that type of guy at Delaware, even though he was a thrower, Still, he was out of the gun, so footwork was different. It's going to be what you said second about it. There are still plenty of people in the league that like their quarterbacks fiery. There's still plenty of people who like their quarterbacks out in front giving the impassioned speech. That's not who Marcus Mariota is. His team responds to him like I think a lot of like you and I would have responded to our parents. When our parents were disappointed in us, there was nothing worse, was there? If they had yelled and screamed, we probably handled it better. But when they just said, "It's really disappointing, Charles," I was devastated.
Mm-hmm.
That's how his team responds to him. So that's going to be the biggest one people are going to pick apart. Does he have the personality for it? Will he be that guy? What I've contended for the last couple of years, you've heard me say it, is that the college game is not as conducive to building field generals. It's much more conducive to executors, because how many people huddle? How many times are you getting in the huddle and looking in that quarterback's eyes? You're calling the play on the sideline before each series, and the coach calls the play. You clap your hands, you go right to the line of scrimmage, and then in between, you're just signaling. It's not the same guy, and I think that more and more we're seeing that, but there's still plenty of people who want to see him show that flash, show that deal. And the Oregon people will tell you that they've seen it, but the pro guys are going to have to be convinced, because the rest of it, I'm convinced, and I think a lot of the pro guys are convinced, that over time and in a short amount of time, he'll get the footwork. He'll learn the pro-style stuff. He's got more than enough arm to make those contested throws that he doesn't have to make now because the system is just getting people wide open. He checks every box you want, Rich, but that leadership where we see a guy get dressed down on the sidelines because the quarterback's unhappy and we all go, "Oh, look at the quarterback. He's got it under control." That's not who Marcus Mariota is.
Well, the system here says I got to take a break, Charles.
All right.
So thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. And we will see you down the line, obviously, as the Super Bowl ends and we start talking about the draft and the combine. That's Charles Davis of Fox Sports here on The Rich Eisen Show.